The phone rang while Alessandro De Luca was pouring himself a drink he didn't even want. It was late. The city outside his penthouse glowed in muted golds and blues, traffic moving far below like something distant and unimportant. 3 months had passed since the divorce papers were signed. 3 months of silence. 3 months of discipline. He had rebuilt his routine with precision, the way he rebuilt everything. Carefully, cleanly, without leaving cracks. He didn't look at the screen. Only people who knew better called this line. "De Luca," he said, his voice calm, controlled. "Mr. De Luca," a male voice replied, official, clipped. "This is Officer Grant from the Midtown Precinct. I'm calling regarding Grace Miller." The glass froze midair. For half a second, Alessandro thought he had misheard. Grace Miller was a name he no longer allowed himself to say out loud. It existed only in locked rooms of his mind, places he visited alone and never stayed long. "Yes?" he said evenly. "She's in custody." The word landed wrong. Too heavy, too sharp. Alessandro slowly set the glass down on the counter. The ice clinked, the sound echoing in the quiet apartment. "In custody for what?" he asked. "There's been an incident involving alleged obstruction and possession of property that doesn't belong to her. She requested legal representation, but given certain connections on file, your name was provided as an emergency contact." "I'm not her husband," Alessandro said automatically. "No, sir. We're aware. But you are listed." Silence stretched between them. "She didn't call me," Alessandro said. "No, sir. She didn't." That made it worse. Alessandro ended the call with a short acknowledgement and stood there, staring at the city. His reflection in the glass looked exactly as it always did. Tailored shirt, relaxed posture, face unreadable. A man in control. Except his pulse had changed. He could feel it in his neck, in his hands. Grace Miller was in jail. Grace who hated attention. Grace who followed rules. Grace who used to remind him to slow down at yellow lights. Grace who had walked out of his life with her spine straight and her eyes dry because she refused to beg. It didn't make sense. 3 months ago, she had stood in the marble entryway of this very penthouse and handed him the signed papers like she was returning something borrowed. No shouting, no accusations, just one look that said she was done waiting to be chosen. He hadn't stopped her. That truth still tasted bitter. Alessandro grabbed his jacket and keys. He didn't tell himself he was going to help her. He told himself he was going to get clarity. That was easier to accept. The drive to the precinct took 12 minutes. He counted every red light. The city felt different at this hour, quieter, more honest. His mind tried to stay focused on logistics, but memory kept slipping in, uninvited. The way Grace used to sit on the edge of the kitchen counter in the mornings barefoot, drinking coffee and reading headlines out loud like they were gossip. The way she smiled without thinking. The way she stopped smiling toward the end. He parked and walked inside. The smell hit first. Cleaning solution and old paper. The sound followed. Phones ringing. Low voices. The hum of fluorescent lights. Alessandro didn't slow his pace. People noticed him anyway. They always did. Officer Grant met him near the front desk. He was younger than Alessandro expected, mid-30s maybe, with tired eyes and a professional stiffness that suggested he already knew who he was dealing with. "This way," the officer said. They walked past holding cells. Alessandro didn't look inside. He didn't need to. The interview room door opened. Grace sat on the other side of the glass. She was wearing a simple dark sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled back, a few strands loose around her face. She looked calm, not frightened, not angry, as if she were waiting for something she had already accepted. And she was looking directly at him. Their eyes met. Something tightened in Alessandro's chest. She didn't smile. She didn't look away either. There was no shock on her face, no relief, just recognition, like she had known he would come. Officer Grant cleared his throat. "You can speak with her. 10 minutes." The door opened and Alessandro stepped inside. The room felt smaller than it should have. Grace stood as soon as she saw him fully, her movements careful, controlled. She wasn't handcuffed, but the knowledge that she could be was enough. "Hi," she said. The word did something to him. It sounded the same. Soft, familiar. "Grace," he replied. They stood there, a few feet apart, the space between them heavy with everything unsaid. She looked good. Too good for this place. Her eyes were steady, her posture straight. The woman who had once loved him enough to walk away. "You didn't call me," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "I didn't." "Then why am I here?" Her lips curved, just slightly, not quite a smile. "Because you always show up when it matters, even when you pretend you won't." That landed deeper than she probably intended. Alessandro studied her face, searching for signs of distress. There were none. Only fatigue, determination. "What happened?" he asked. She exhaled slowly. "I need you to listen before you decide anything." "I'm listening." She nodded once, like she appreciated that more than she would admit. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said. "Not intentionally, but I did something that made someone uncomfortable. And they decided to make it a problem." "That's vague," he said. "I know. I can't explain everything here." That concerned him. "Grace," he said, lowering his voice, "you don't belong in a place like this." She gave a quiet, almost amused huff. "Neither do you, and yet you visit often." He ignored that. "Are you in danger?" he asked. Her gaze flickered, just once. "No," she said. "Not like that." That answer wasn't complete. Officer Grant knocked lightly and stepped back in. "Time." Alessandro didn't look at him. "What are the charges?" "Pending," the officer replied. "She'll be held overnight unless bail is posted." "How much?" Officer Grant named the number. Grace opened her mouth. "Less." "I'll handle it," he said, without hesitation. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, there was something different there. Gratitude mixed with frustration. "I didn't ask you to," she said. "I know. That doesn't mean you should. That doesn't mean I won't." They stared at each other, the air between them tight. "You haven't changed," she said softly. Neither had she. Alessandro signed the paperwork. The process was efficient, quiet. Money had a way of smoothing things over. He didn't enjoy that fact, but he understood it. Grace was released an hour later. She stepped out into the cool night air and wrapped her arms around herself. Alessandro held his jacket out instinctively. She hesitated, then accepted it. "Thank you," she said. "For the jacket or the bail?" "For coming." They walked toward his car in silence. She slid into the passenger seat like she'd done 1,000 times before. He noticed she buckled her seatbelt immediately. Some habits never left. As he started the engine, she spoke. "I didn't want you dragged back into this." "You didn't drag me," he said. "Someone else did." Her fingers tightened around the edge of his jacket. "I didn't call you," she repeated. "And whoever did it on purpose." Alessandro glanced at her, really looked at her. "For what reason?" he asked. Grace stared straight ahead, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's what I'm afraid to find out." The car pulled into traffic, the city swallowing them whole, and Alessandro realized this wasn't just a mistake that needed fixing. It was the beginning of something neither of them had planned to face again. Alessandro kept both hands on the steering wheel, but his attention wasn't on the road. Grace sat beside him, wrapped in his jacket like it belonged there, as if she had never left his life in the first place. The streetlight slipped across her face in slow flashes. Each time the light caught her eyes, he saw the same steady gaze that used to undo him in private, calm on the surface, full of thoughts underneath. He drove in silence for 2 minutes before the quiet became its own kind of pressure. "You're going to tell me what happened," he said, not as a command, but as a fact. Grace stared out the windshield. "I'm going to tell you what I can." "That's not an answer." "It's the safest one." Alessandro's jaw tightened. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, forcing himself to breathe evenly. He'd spent 3 months training himself not to react to her, not to chase, not to beg, not to punish himself for missing her. But she was here, in his car, wearing his jacket. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. "Where are you staying?" he asked. Grace's lips pressed together. "Not far." "That's vague." "So as I'll handle it," she shot back. And for the first time since he'd walked into the precinct, her voice carried heat. Alessandro glanced at her, surprised by the spark. It was familiar. It used to show up when she thought he was being arrogant. She hated that part of him, the part that thought money and power could solve what honesty couldn't. He should have felt annoyed. Instead, something low and sharp moved through him. The reminder that Grace was still Grace, still fearless, still stubborn, still the only person who ever spoke to him like he wasn't untouchable. "Fine," he said. "I'll rephrase. I'm not letting you get dropped off somewhere unknown after you were detained." "I wasn't detained like I did something violent," she said dryly. "I wasn't in there biting anyone." He huffed a quiet laugh before he could stop it. "You'd lose." She turned her head, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" "You'd lose in a biting contest," he said, dead serious. Grace stared at him for half a second, then a soft laugh escaped her, quick and reluctant, like she hated that he'd made her do it. It hit Alessandro in the chest, the sound of her laughter. He'd forgotten how much it changed the air around him. She caught herself, wiped the smile away. "I'm staying at my sister's." "Which sister?" he asked. Grace blinked. "I only have one." "Then why did you answer like you had 3? "I didn't answer like that. You did." She gave him a look. "You're still impossible." "And you're still dramatic," he replied, and immediately regretted it. Grace's expression shifted. The lightness disappeared. Alessandro kept his eyes on the road. He didn't apologize, not because he didn't want to, because apologies from him used to come with conditions, with explanations, with defenses. He was trying to do this differently. If there was even a this to do. They drove a few more blocks before she spoke again, quieter now. "My sister doesn't know about tonight," Grace said. "Why not?" "Because I don't want her scared, and because I don't want her telling me what she thinks you'll do." Alessandro's mouth tightened. "What does she think I'll do?" Grace shrugged, but her shoulders were tense under his jacket. "She thinks you solve problems in ways normal people don't." "That's unfair," he said. Grace turned to him slowly. "Is it?" He didn't answer because any answer would sound like a lie. He pulled into a private garage beneath his building. The security gate slid shut behind them, sealing out the night. He parked in his reserved space and cut the engine. For a second, neither of them moved. Grace's fingers toyed with the cuff of his jacket, rubbing the fabric like she was grounding herself. "I'm not going upstairs," she said. Alessandro looked at her. "You're not?" "No." "Grace." "I'm not coming back to your place," she said firmly. "Not after everything." Alessandro leaned back in his seat, his composure tight. "Then where are we going?" She hesitated. "You can drop me at my sister's." "Without answers?" Her gaze hardened. "Without control." That word stung, because she was right. He wanted control. He wanted to take this messy, confusing situation and lock it into a plan, a timeline, an outcome. Grace had left him because of control. He exhaled slowly. "I'm not trying to control you." "Yes, you are," she said, not cruelly, just honestly. "You always are, even when you're being kind." Alessandro turned his head toward her, eyes steady. "What do you want from me tonight?" Grace froze at the question. The air thickened. She swallowed. "I want you to not make decisions for me. And if I don't, then you'll prove I was right to leave." The words landed clean and sharp. Alessandro stared at her, and for the first time the memory of that day 3 months ago didn't feel distant. He saw her standing in his doorway, holding the papers, her hands shaking just enough to show it wasn't easy. He remembered how she'd looked at him like she had given him every chance and he had still chosen silence. He had. He opened his door and stepped out, then walked around to her side and opened hers. Grace didn't move. He offered his hand. She glanced at it like it was a trap. "I'm not pulling you anywhere," he said, voice low. "I'm helping you out of the car." Grace stared at him for a long second before placing her hand in his. The moment her fingers touched his, Alessandro felt it. That jolt, that deep recognition. It wasn't just attraction. It was familiarity in the most dangerous form, the kind that made you forget you'd promised yourself you were done. Grace stepped out, still holding his hand, and the garage suddenly felt too intimate, too quiet. His building security cameras watched from corners, but it didn't matter. It was the space between them that made his pulse tighten. She released his hand quickly, as if she'd realized she'd held it too long. Alessandro didn't comment. He just led the way toward the elevator. Grace slowed when she saw where they were going. "I thought you weren't taking me upstairs." "I'm not," he said. "Then where?" "The lobby," he answered. "We'll talk in public where you feel safer." Grace's eyes flickered with surprise. She didn't expect him to give her that. They rode the elevator up in silence. The mirrored walls reflected them. Him in dark clothes, composed and unreadable. Her wrapped in his jacket, hair loose around her face, eyes alert. It looked wrong. And somehow, it looked right. In the lobby, Alessandro led her to a quiet seating area near the windows where the night skyline spread out like a backdrop. The doorman nodded politely but didn't stare. Everyone here was trained not to stare. Grace sank onto the sofa, crossing her legs. Alessandro sat across from her, leaving space. Enough to show he was trying. He studied her. "You're not trembling," he said. Grace's brows lifted. "Is that a requirement?" "No," he replied calmly. "It means you've already made peace with whatever this is." Grace's mouth tightened. "I'm trying to." Alessandro leaned forward slightly. "Tell me." Grace's gaze shifted to the window again, as if she needed the city to look at instead of him. 3 weeks ago, she began. "I got an email from an address I didn't recognize." Alessandro's eyes narrowed. "About what?" "A nonprofit," she said. "A women's shelter. They said they'd gotten my name from a volunteer list." "You don't volunteer," Alessandro said. Grace shot him a look. "I do. I just didn't tell you." He blinked once, then nodded. "Continue." Grace's voice steadied. "They wanted help with legal paperwork. Someone was donating supplies, but there were issues. Missing forms, confusion. They said they needed someone detail-oriented." Alessandro frowned. "You said you weren't going to tell me everything here." "I'm not," she said. "But you need the shape of it." He stayed quiet. "I went," Grace continued. "I met a woman there, older, tired, but kind. She said they were under pressure, that someone was trying to shut them down." Alessandro's expression hardened. "Who?" Grace shook her head. She didn't know, or she wouldn't say. She inhaled, then let it out slowly. "I helped them with paperwork. I organized files. I made calls. It felt good to do something normal." Alessandro's eyes softened at that, just slightly. He understood the craving for normal. But his version of normal didn't include shelters and paperwork. Grace continued. "A week later, a man showed up. He said he was a donor. He wanted to meet me." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "Describe him." Grace hesitated. Well-dressed, friendly, too friendly, like he was trying to be charming, but he didn't know how to stop. Alessandro's eyes narrowed further. "Name?" "I don't know if it was real," Grace admitted. "He introduced himself as Daniel." Alessandro leaned back a fraction, processing. Grace's fingers curled into the jacket sleeve. "He offered funding, a large amount, but he wanted some things done fast. He wanted certain documents signed. He wanted access to certain records." Alessandro's voice dropped. "Records of what?" Grace's gaze flicked to his face, and her voice got quieter. "Of women who were hiding, changing their names, running from someone." A chill ran through Alessandro's control. His world touched that world sometimes, the part where people disappeared, not always for good reasons, not always for bad. Grace kept speaking. "I told him no. I said the shelter couldn't share that. He laughed like I was cute." Alessandro's hands tightened on his knees. Grace's eyes flashed. That's when I started digging, because it didn't feel right. And you found something, Alessandro said, more statement than question. Grace nodded once. I found a file that didn't belong there. Alessandro's gaze locked on hers. What kind of file? Grace swallowed. Financial transfers, not shelter stuff. Different accounts, different names, and a pattern. Money moving through donations, then disappearing. Alessandro's expression grew colder. Laundering. Grace nodded again, barely. And tonight? He asked. Grace exhaled. I copied the file. Alessandro stared at her. You copied it? Yes. Why? Grace's eyes sharpened. Because someone was using those women as cover, using a shelter as a front, and I couldn't just walk away. Alessandro's voice was quiet, dangerous in its calm. That's not your job, Grace. Grace leaned forward, her voice firmer. You don't get to tell me what's my job. I'm not a porcelain doll. I know, he said, almost too quickly. That's not what I meant. Grace's eyes softened just a fraction. Then what did you mean? Alessandro looked at her for a long moment, then spoke carefully. I meant that you put yourself in the path of people who don't mind ruining lives to protect themselves. Grace's lips pressed together. And you don't? The question hung between them. Alessandro's gaze didn't waver. I ruin lives when I have to. Grace's breath caught, more at his honesty than the words. Alessandro continued, calm but serious. But I don't ruin innocent ones, and I don't touch women's shelters. Grace looked down, her fingers still gripping his jacket. I believed that once. Alessandro's expression tightened. And now you don't? Grace's voice went softer. Now I don't know what to believe. That's why I left. There it was, the real wound. Alessandro leaned back, forcing himself not to reach across the space. He wanted to touch her hand. He wanted to pull her close. He wanted to prove something, but he had learned that proving without listening was just control wearing a better suit. So you copied the file, he said, redirecting before the emotion swallowed them. Where is it? Grace lifted her chin. Not here. Alessandro's eyes narrowed again. Grace. She held his gaze. I didn't bring it to a shelter. I didn't bring it to my sisters. And I didn't bring it here. Smart, he admitted. Grace's lips twitched. Don't sound proud. I hate that it feels like something you would do. He almost smiled. Almost. And then what happened? He asked. Grace exhaled. Tonight, I went back to the shelter after hours. The staff had left. I wanted to make sure the file wasn't missing. I wanted to confirm. Alessandro's voice dropped. You went alone. Yes. His eyes sharpened. Why? Grace gave him a look like the answer should have been obvious. Because I'm stubborn. He let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and a frustrated sigh. That part I remember. Grace continued, voice controlled. When I walked out, someone was waiting. 2 men. Not police, not staff. Alessandro's body went still. They said they wanted what I took, Grace said. I told them I didn't know what they were talking about. And? Alessandro asked. Grace's mouth tightened. One of them grabbed my purse. Alessandro's eyes darkened. Grace quickly added, I didn't let it turn into a fight. I stepped back. I told them to take it. Alessandro's jaw flexed. He didn't like hearing that someone had put hands on her even briefly. They searched it. Grace continued. They didn't find anything, because it wasn't there. And then? Alessandro pressed. Grace's gaze shifted away, and for the first time, she looked tired. Then one of them said, Fine. We'll do it the easy way. Alessandro's voice was barely audible. What easy way? Grace looked back at him. They called the police. Alessandro blinked. They called the police. Grace nodded. They claimed I stole something from the shelter. A watch. Expensive. They said it belonged to a donor. Alessandro stared at her, then let out a slow breath through his nose. And somehow the watch was in my coat pocket. Grace finished quietly. Alessandro's eyes hardened, planted. Grace nodded, jaw tight. They made it look simple, like I was careless, like I was greedy. Alessandro's voice dropped. You've never been greedy. Grace swallowed. Tell that to the officers who looked at me like I was lying. Alessandro's chest tightened at that. He knew what it felt like to be judged without being heard. He hated that she'd felt it too. And you didn't call me, he said, returning to the point that had haunted him since the call. Grace's expression shifted again, guarded. No. Why? Grace stared at him for a long moment. Then she answered honestly. Because I didn't want to need you, she said. Alessandro's throat tightened. Grace continued, voice softer. And because I didn't want you to think I was using you. Alessandro stood slowly, then took 2 steps toward her, stopping at a respectful distance. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her like he was trying to memorize every detail. Grace, he said quietly, you could never use me. You don't even know how. Her breath caught at the sincerity. He lowered his voice further. And if you needed me, you should have called. Grace's lips parted, but no words came. For a second, they simply looked at each other. The city lights behind her turned her hair into a soft halo. The jacket hung on her shoulders like it belonged there, like he belonged there. Alessandro didn't move closer, but his presence did something anyway, wrapped around her, steady, protective, familiar. Grace's voice came out in a whisper. You make it hard to hate you. Alessandro's mouth tightened into something almost gentle. Good. Grace gave him a look that was half warning, half vulnerability. Don't get confident. I'm not confident, he said. I'm terrified. That confession surprised her. It surprised him too, the way it slipped out without permission. Grace's eyes softened, and for a heartbeat, she looked like she used to. Like she might step into him. Like she might let herself be held. Then she pulled back emotionally, as if she'd noticed the danger of that softness. Who called you? Grace asked, shifting the focus. Alessandro's expression turned sharp again. I'm going to find out. That's exactly what I didn't want, she said. Alessandro held her gaze. You don't get to walk into a trap and then tell me not to look for the hand that set it. Grace's voice firmed. I'm not asking you to ignore it. I'm asking you to not become that. That, he repeated. Grace nodded once. The man who solves everything with fear. Alessandro's eyes narrowed. Is that what you think I am? Grace hesitated. I think you can be. Alessandro stared at her, then spoke carefully. Then let me show you what else I can be. Grace's breath caught because there was no arrogance in his tone, only resolve. Alessandro reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't call anyone. He just opened the screen and held it out to her. Grace frowned. What are you doing? I'm giving you a choice, he said. Grace's eyes flicked between his face and the phone. Alessandro kept his voice calm. You can leave now. I'll take you to your sister's, no questions, no pressure, or you can tell me where the file is, and we do this together. Legally, cleanly, no fear. Grace stared at him. For a second, the lobby felt too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. You're serious, she said. Yes. Grace's lips pressed together. And if I choose the second option? Alessandro's gaze softened slightly. Then you're not alone. Grace looked down at the phone again, then up at him. You really want to do this cleanly, she said, skeptical. Alessandro's mouth curved faintly. I'm trying. Don't laugh. Grace let out a small, unwilling sound, almost a laugh. You sound like a man reading a self-help book. Alessandro's brow lifted. I would never. Grace tilted her head. You absolutely would, if it had charts. He huffed a short laugh. If it had charts, I'd frame it. Grace's eyes warmed for a second, and there it was again. Connection, effortless and familiar, sneaking through the cracks. Then her expression tightened as reality returned. The file is not just about money, Grace said quietly. Alessandro's amusement vanished. What else is it about? Grace took a breath, steadying herself. Names. Alessandro's gaze sharpened. Whose names? Grace hesitated, then spoke carefully. People connected to the shelter, donors, staff, but also people who shouldn't be connected to it. Alessandro's voice dropped. Like who? Grace's eyes held his, and her voice became a whisper. Someone tied to you. Alessandro froze. Grace swallowed. That's why I didn't call you, because I didn't know if I was walking into your world, or if your world had already been inside mine. Alessandro's face stayed controlled, but something in his eyes shifted, an immediate, dangerous focus. He stepped closer, just one step, stopping himself before he invaded her space. Grace, he said, low and steady. Tell me the name. Grace's lips parted. Her throat worked as if the word was stuck there. Then she shook her head once. Not here, she whispered. Not in your building, not anywhere with cameras. Alessandro's gaze flicked upward, instantly noticing what she meant. He didn't argue. He nodded once, sharp. Fine. Grace exhaled, relief and fear mixing. I'm not going to do anything, he cut in, calm but firm. Until you tell me everything. And until you're safe. Grace's eyes searched his face, trying to find the lie. She didn't. Alessandro turned slightly, signaling movement without grabbing her. Come. Grace blinked. Where? To my car, he said. We're going to a place with no cameras, no staff, no audience. Grace hesitated. That sounds like the opposite of safe. Alessandro's mouth tightened in a restrained smile. I knew you'd say that. Grace's brows lifted. Then why? Because you trust me more than you want to admit, he said, voice low. Grace stared at him, startled by the accuracy. Alessandro held out his hand again, not demanding, offering. Grace looked at it, then at his face. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she placed her hand in his. And as her fingers slid into his palm, she whispered a single sentence that made Alessandro's blood run cold. The person behind this, she said, barely audible, is someone who knows exactly how to hurt you, without touching you. Alessandro's grip tightened, not painful, just solid. He led her toward the doors, the city waiting outside like a test. And in the reflective glass, as they walked side by side, it looked less like a man rescuing his ex-wife, and more like two people being pulled back toward the same fire, whether they were ready or not. Alessandro guided Grace through the revolving doors and out into the cold night, his hand still around hers. Steady, not possessive. The city air smelled like rain that never fully fell, mixed with exhaust and late-night food carts. Grace kept her chin lifted, but her fingers tightened once, briefly, like her body was still catching up to what had happened. He didn't speak until they were inside the car again and the doors shut with a solid, private thud. No cameras, she murmured, glancing at the rearview mirror. Or at least, fewer. Alessandro didn't start the engine yet. He studied her profile in the dashboard glow. Her eyelashes, the set of her mouth, the quiet strain she tried to hide. You said someone tied to me, he said softly. And you refused to say the name in my building. Grace nodded. Because you live in a place designed for people who never want to be caught off guard. His mouth tightened. You're not wrong. Grace pulled his jacket closer around herself. It swallowed her in warmth and scent. Clean cologne, leather, something that always made her feel like she could breathe again and also couldn't breathe at all. Alessandro noticed. He didn't comment. He just asked, Where do you feel comfortable talking? Grace thought for a moment. Somewhere normal. Normal, he repeated, like it was a language he had once studied and forgot. Yes, she said, then added dryly, Not a private club, not a back room, not a place where someone greets you by last name like you're royalty. Alessandro's eyes flicked to hers. So, a diner. Grace's lips twitched. A diner is perfect. He started the engine and pulled out smoothly, like he hadn't spent the last hour with his heart trying to break open. They drove in quiet for several minutes. The streetlights painted quick stripes across the windshield. Grace kept watching the mirrors, and Alessandro noticed that too. "You're checking if someone's following," he said. Grace didn't deny it. "Because I don't know if they stopped at planting a watch." Alessandro's voice stayed calm. "If someone is behind us, I'll know." Grace finally looked at him. "That's not comforting. That's terrifying." He glanced back at her, a hint of amusement touching his eyes. "It can be both." Grace exhaled, and despite herself, a small laugh slipped out. More like a breath with humor in it than a real laugh. Alessandro's hand stayed steady on the wheel, but something inside him loosened at that sound. They pulled into a 24-hour diner on a corner where the neon sign flickered like it was tired. Inside, it smelled like coffee, butter, and something fried. The booths were worn, the lights warm, and the people here looked like they had problems that didn't involve lawyers on speed dial. Grace paused at the door. Alessandro leaned in slightly. "Too normal?" Grace shook her head. "No, it's good." They slid into a booth near the back. Alessandro chose the seat facing the room without thinking. Grace noticed and raised an eyebrow. "You still sit like you're expecting an ambush," she said. "It's a habit." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Or a personality." Alessandro's mouth curved faintly. "That too." A waitress approached, mid-50s, kind eyes, sharp voice. "Coffee?" Grace blinked, caught off guard by how simple the question was. "Yes," she said quickly. "Please." Alessandro nodded. "Coffee?" "Black." The waitress looked at him like she'd seen 100 men like him try to look unbothered in places like this. "Honey, you sure you don't want sugar? You look like you've been chewing nails." Grace's lips pressed together to hold back a smile. Alessandro, to his credit, didn't flinch. "Black is fine." The waitress gave him a look that said she didn't believe him but didn't care. "Pie's fresh." Grace glanced at Alessandro once the waitress walked away. "You're going to act like you don't want pie." "I don't want pie," he said. Grace leaned in slightly, voice quieter. "You want pie." Alessandro stared at her, and his eyes warmed just a fraction. "You don't know what I want." Grace held his gaze. "I used to." The moment shifted. The air between them grew heavier, quieter. Alessandro's expression stayed controlled, but his eyes betrayed him. Grace broke it first, looking down at the table. "Okay, we talk." Alessandro didn't push. He waited. The waitress brought coffee. Grace wrapped her hands around the mug immediately, like she needed the heat. Alessandro didn't touch his yet. Grace took a breath. "The shelter's name is Harbor House." Alessandro nodded once, storing it. "The email came from someone claiming to be their volunteer coordinator." Grace continued. "It sounded real. It had names, phone numbers. It referenced a charity event I actually attended years ago." Alessandro's gaze sharpened. "So whoever wrote it had access to details about you?" Grace nodded. "That's when I started feeling watched, not in a dramatic way. Just too many coincidences." Alessandro's voice dropped. "And the donor." "Daniel," Grace said. "Probably not his real name. He was polished, friendly, and he kept calling me sweetheart, like he thought it made him charming. It made me want to throw my coffee at him." Alessandro's eyes flicked up. "Did you?" Grace shook her head. "I behaved. I'm proud of myself." Something in Alessandro's face softened, brief admiration. Grace continued. "He wanted donor records. He asked about intake forms. He asked who was staying there and why. He acted like he was worried about safety, but it felt like he was looking for someone." Alessandro's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. "You said you found a file." Grace nodded. "In a drawer that shouldn't have been unlocked. It was labeled like shelter paperwork, but it wasn't. It was account numbers, transfer dates, and names." Alessandro stayed quiet. Grace's voice lowered. "One name stood out because I recognized it." Alessandro's gaze locked on hers. "Say it." Grace hesitated, eyes flicking around the diner out of habit, then back to him. "Wesley Hart," she said. Alessandro's entire posture changed, not dramatic, not violent, just focused, like a door inside him had closed and another had opened. Grace saw it. "You know him." Alessandro didn't answer immediately. His silence was an answer on its own. Grace's fingers tightened around her mug. "Who is he?" Alessandro finally spoke carefully. "He's not one of my men." Grace watched him closely. "He's a consultant," Alessandro continued. "A fixer. He offers services to people with money who want problems to disappear. He doesn't belong to my organization, but our circles overlap." Grace swallowed. "So he could have gotten my name through you?" Alessandro's jaw flexed. "Possibly." Grace's eyes flashed. Not anger exactly. Pain. "That's what I was afraid of." Alessandro leaned forward slightly. "Grace, listen to me. If he targeted you, it wasn't because you matter to my world. It was because you matter to me." Grace froze. The words landed softly, but they hit hard. Alessandro didn't look away. He kept going, voice low. "People like him don't waste effort unless there's leverage." Grace's breath caught. "So I'm leverage." "You're not an object," he said immediately. "You're not a tool, but to him, yes. That's how he thinks." Grace stared down into her coffee like she could dissolve her thoughts in it. "And I walked straight into it." Alessandro's voice gentled. "You walked into it trying to protect women who needed help." Grace's lips pressed together, emotion tightening her throat. "I still feel stupid." "You're not stupid," he said. "You're brave, and you're stubborn, and I—" He paused, as if choosing the right truth. "I miss you." Grace looked up sharply. Alessandro held her gaze. No theatrics, no apology wrapped in excuses. Just the raw statement, simple and direct. Grace's voice came out quieter than she intended. "You didn't miss me enough to stop the divorce." Alessandro's expression tightened, but he didn't retreat. "I thought letting you go was the only way to keep you safe." Grace let out a small, bitter laugh. "You said you wouldn't make decisions for me tonight." He exhaled slowly, accepting it. "You're right." The waitress appeared again with a slice of pie and set it down in the middle of the table like a judge delivering a verdict. "On the house," she said, looking straight at Alessandro. "You both look like you need sugar before you say something dumb." Grace's eyes widened. Then she laughed, real this time, surprised. Alessandro blinked once. "We didn't order that." The waitress shrugged. "You needed it." She walked away. Grace looked at the pie, then at Alessandro. "See? Normal. You just got emotionally supervised by a stranger." Alessandro's mouth twitched. "I don't like it." Grace picked up her fork. "You love it." "I do not." Grace took a bite and closed her eyes for a second, like it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. Alessandro watched her without meaning to. The way her lips moved, the way she relaxed, just a little. Grace caught him staring. "Stop." Alessandro didn't. "You look better when you're not holding your breath." Grace's cheeks warmed. "I'm not holding my breath." "Yes, you are," he said calmly. "You always did around me toward the end." Grace's fork paused. The truth sat between them like the pie. She set the fork down slowly. "The file," she said, pulling them back. "I copied it." "Where is it?" Alessandro asked. Grace hesitated. "I put it somewhere safe." "Safe how?" "Safe from your world," she said honestly. "And from mine." Alessandro didn't flinch at the implication. "Tell me." Grace's voice lowered. "I rented a small storage locker, 24-hour access, cash payment, no name. The drive is in a sealed envelope inside a tin, under a stack of old blankets." Alessandro's eyes narrowed. "You rented a storage locker with cash." Grace lifted her chin. "I learned from you." His lips parted, then closed. "That's not the lesson I wanted to teach you." Grace's gaze softened, just slightly. "I know." Alessandro leaned forward again. "Grace, if Wesley Hart is involved, then the locker isn't safe for long. He'll trace patterns. He'll watch. He'll find the shelter, and then he'll find you. Grace swallowed. I didn't tell anyone. You didn't have to, Alessandro said. If he planted a watch on you, he can plant eyes on you too. Grace's face tightened. So what do we do? Alessandro's voice stayed steady. We get the drive, tonight. Grace blinked. Tonight? Yes. Grace's fingers gripped the mug again. Alessandro. He softened his tone. We don't have to do anything aggressive. We retrieve it, we hand it to an attorney, and we force this into daylight. Cleanly. The way you asked. Grace studied him like she was searching for the old version of him. The one who would solve everything with pressure and fear. Instead, she saw a man trying. A man choosing restraint because she asked him to. It was unsettling. It was attractive. Grace's voice came out quieter. If we retrieve it, you'll see everything. I want to, he said. Grace's eyes held his. And if the file proves someone you know is involved? Alessandro didn't hesitate. Then they're not someone I know anymore. Grace's throat worked. That's a big promise. It's not a promise, he said. It's a line. Grace exhaled slowly, then nodded once. Okay. Alessandro stood and offered his hand again across the table. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried everything. Partnership, protection, choice. Grace looked at his hand, then up at his face. You're not doing this to get me back, she said carefully. Alessandro's eyes softened, honest. No. Grace's brows lifted slightly. He added, voice low. I'm doing this because I never stopped wanting you back. But I won't use this to force you. Grace stared at him, breath caught in her chest. Then she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. They walked out of the diner together, the bell over the door chiming like a quiet announcement. The night air hit them again. Alessandro guided her toward the car, but his gaze flicked across the street, scanning. Grace noticed. What? Alessandro didn't answer right away. He opened her door, waited until she was inside, then shut it gently. He moved to his side, slipped into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Grace watched his face, the slight tension in his jaw. Alessandro, she said softly. What is it? He looked in the rearview mirror again, once, twice, then finally spoke. I think, he said, calm but certain, we're not leaving this parking lot alone. Grace's stomach tightened. Outside, across the street, a dark sedan that hadn't been there before eased its headlights on, slow, patient, like it had all the time in the world. And Grace realized the next question wasn't whether they should go get the drive tonight. It was whether they could get there first. Alessandro didn't start the car right away. The dark sedan across the street idled with its headlights on, angled just enough to pretend it was nothing. Too still, too patient. Grace felt it before she fully understood it. The same instinct that had told her the shelter email wasn't normal. The same quiet warning that had followed her for weeks. Is that them? She asked, keeping her voice steady. It's someone, Alessandro replied. His tone was calm, almost casual, but his eyes were sharp. Seatbelt. Grace clicked it in without comment. Alessandro eased the car out of the parking spot like he had nowhere to be. The sedan didn't move at first. Then, as they turned the corner, it did. Grace watched the side mirror. They're following. Yes. You sound very sure. I am. She swallowed. What do we do? Alessandro didn't speed. He didn't panic. He drove like a man on his way home after dinner, turning when he meant to, stopping fully at lights. The sedan stayed back, careful not to be obvious. We don't go to the locker, he said. Grace's heart dipped. But the drive. Not with an audience, he cut in gently. We changed the rhythm. Grace nodded, trusting him without needing him to say more. That trust surprised her. It warmed her and scared her at the same time. Alessandro took a longer route, looping through streets that narrowed and widened again, passing through areas that mixed late-night bars with quiet apartments. At one point, he slowed near a convenience store and pulled into the lot. The sedan rolled past. Grace let out the breath she'd been holding. They lost us? They didn't want to stop, he said. They wanted to see where we were going. Grace's fingers curled into the seat. So, what now? Alessandro turned toward her. The dashboard light softened his face, stripped it of sharp edges. Now we go somewhere I know is clean. She hesitated. Your place? No, he said immediately. Not yet. Grace searched his face. Why? Because this isn't about hiding, he said. It's about choice. And I want you to choose to be there. Her chest tightened at that. He drove again, this time toward the river, stopping near a quiet overlook where the city lights stretched across the water. He parked, turned off the engine, and for the first time since the diner, the world went quiet. Grace looked out at the water. This used to be our spot. I know, he said. They sat in silence, memories moving between them without permission. The first time they'd come here, Grace had laughed at how dramatic he'd tried to be. The last time she'd cried and he'd pretended not to notice. Alessandro broke the quiet. We're safe for the moment. Grace nodded. For the moment. She turned toward him. You didn't ask me to stay tonight. I didn't, he said, because I promised I wouldn't decide for you. Grace studied him. And if I decide to leave, then I'll drive you wherever you want, he said, and I'll still deal with the rest. She searched his eyes for pressure. There was none. Only concern. Only care. Grace exhaled. That's new. I'm learning, he said. She smiled faintly. You're terrible at it. He almost smiled back. Grace shifted in her seat, pulling his jacket closer. If Wesley Hart is involved, and he knows about me, then the locker is already compromised. Not necessarily, Alessandro said. But it will be. Grace nodded. So we retrieve it tomorrow, with a lawyer, daylight. Yes. And tonight? Alessandro met her gaze. Tonight I want you somewhere warm. Somewhere you can sleep without listening for footsteps. Grace's heart beat faster. And that place is... He waited a beat. My place, if you want. The words were simple. No claim, no expectation. Grace looked away, then back. If I go with you, I don't want it to be about the past. Alessandro's voice was low. It won't be. And I don't want promises you can't keep. I won't make them. And I don't want you touching me because you feel guilty. His jaw tightened. I never touched you because of guilt. Grace's breath caught at the honesty. She nodded once. Okay. They drove in silence, but it was different now. Easier. When they arrived at his building, Alessandro parked and scanned the street before getting out. The lobby was quiet, the staff discreet. Inside the elevator, the space felt smaller than before. Grace stood close enough to feel his warmth, not close enough to touch. The tension was almost physical. When the doors opened, Alessandro led her inside and locked the door behind them. He didn't lean on it. He didn't corner her. He just turned and faced her. Guest room's ready, he said. You can take a shower first. Grace looked around. Everything was familiar. Everything was unchanged. It felt like walking into a memory that had been waiting. I don't want the guest room, she said quietly. Alessandro's breath slowed. Grace. She stepped closer. I don't want to pretend this doesn't affect me. I don't want to sleep alone tonight wondering if someone's watching. And I don't want to wake up tomorrow pretending we didn't choose this. He held her gaze, the restraint in him tight but deliberate. Then say what you want. Grace swallowed. I want to stay with you. Tonight. Alessandro nodded once. Okay. He didn't touch her right away. He took off his jacket from her shoulders slowly, carefully, like it mattered. Then he set it aside. Tell me to stop, he said softly. Grace stepped into him. The kiss was unhurried. No rush. No hunger disguised as urgency. Just warmth, recognition, and a quiet ache easing at last. Grace's hands rested against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady under her palms. Alessandro's hands framed her waist, respectful, grounding. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Grace melted. Not because she was weak, but because she finally felt safe enough to let go. They moved together naturally, shedding layers of fear more than clothing. Laughter slipped in when they bumped into the couch. He brushed hair from her face and whispered her name like it was still his favorite word. Later, they lay tangled in sheets, the city glowing faintly through the windows. Grace rested her head on his chest, listening to his breathing. "This doesn't fix everything," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but it helps." "Yes." She smiled faintly. "I missed you." Alessandro closed his eyes. "I missed you more than I let myself admit." Grace traced a slow line across his skin. "Tomorrow changes things." "Yes." "And Wesley Hart won't like daylight." "No," Alessandro said. "He won't." Grace lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "If this gets worse," he cut her off gently, "it won't get careless." She studied him. "That's not the same thing." Alessandro's expression tightened. "No, it isn't." Outside, somewhere far below, a car door slammed. Grace stiffened. Alessandro felt it instantly. His body went alert, listening. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, checking a message that had just come through. His face went still. Grace's heart picked up. "Alessandro?" He looked at her, voice calm but serious. "We have a problem." Her breath caught. "What kind?" "The kind that means Wesley Hart knows you're not alone anymore." Grace's stomach tightened. Alessandro set the phone down and pulled her closer, protective without being suffocating. "And that means," he added quietly, "tomorrow just became very important." Alessandro didn't move away from Grace when he said it. He kept her close, one arm secure around her waist, his palm resting flat against her back like he could anchor her to the bed with nothing but steadiness. Grace's cheek was against his chest, warm skin against warm skin, the sheets tangled around their legs. The city outside was quiet in that late-night way that made every sound feel louder. Grace lifted her head. "You said he knows I'm not alone anymore." Alessandro's eyes stayed on her face. "Yes." "How?" Her voice was calm, but her fingers had tightened on the sheet. Alessandro reached to the nightstand for his phone again, not to hide it from her, only to show her. "This came in 5 minutes ago." He turned the screen toward her. It wasn't a number. It wasn't a name. It was a message from an encrypted contact he rarely saw. "He's making moves. He asked where you took her. He's paying for eyes." Grace stared at the words, then looked up. "He asked where you took me." Alessandro nodded once, which means he didn't know for sure. "Not yet." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" she asked. It was the kind of line that would have sounded sharper if her voice hadn't been tired. Alessandro's mouth twitched faintly, an almost smile. "It means we still have time," he said. Grace exhaled slowly. "Time for what?" "For you to sleep," Alessandro answered immediately, and Grace blinked like she hadn't expected that. "Alessandro?" "No," he said, gentle but firm. "You've been running on adrenaline for weeks. You're safe here. My building is secure. My staff doesn't talk, and no one comes to this floor without me knowing." Grace searched his eyes, trying to decide if that was reassurance or control. It was both. "What about you?" she asked. "I'll be awake," he said. Grace frowned. "That's not healthy." Alessandro's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Are you giving me wellness advice right now?" Grace's lips twitched. "Someone has to. You look like you drink espresso to relax." "I do," he said, completely serious. Grace let out a short laugh, and it loosened the tightness in her chest just a little. Then she sobered again. "If he's watching, tomorrow isn't simple." "No," Alessandro agreed. "Tomorrow is careful." Grace shifted on the bed, propping herself up on one elbow. "You said you'd do this cleanly." "I will." "And you said no fear." "I said no fear tactics," he corrected softly. "Not no fear. Fear is allowed. It's normal." Grace's gaze held his. "So what's the plan?" Alessandro looked at the phone again, then set it aside. We don't go to the locker at opening time. Grace's heart dipped. Why? Because if he's paying for eyes, that's exactly where they'll be, he said. Instead, we do something he can't predict. Grace studied him. Like what? Alessandro's answer was immediate. We bring daylight to him first. Grace blinked. That sounds like the opposite of unpredictable. It is unpredictable for someone who relies on shadows, he said calmly. We go to an attorney at 9 a.m. We sign you onto representation officially. We document the false evidence, and then we retrieve the drive with counsel and a chain of custody. Grace's throat tightened at the phrase. It sounded safe. It sounded real. It also sounded like a man actually trying, to meet her where she needed him. And if he tries to stop that? She asked. Alessandro's gaze didn't harden. It steadied. Then he'll have to do it in the open. Grace watched his face for a long moment. You're serious about not turning into that? Yes. Grace's fingers traced lightly over his chest, almost absent-minded. You're good at being calm. Alessandro's voice softened. I'm good at looking calm. Grace's eyes lifted to his. And what are you really? Alessandro didn't answer right away. He slid his hand up her arm slowly, stopping at her shoulder. I'm relieved you're here, he admitted, and furious someone thought they could touch your life. Grace's breath caught at the honesty. They didn't touch me. They tried, he said. She nodded, swallowing. Okay. Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they still hadn't said about the divorce, about the space between them, about how easily their bodies remembered what their pride tried to forget. Grace's gaze dropped to his lips, then back up. You promised me something tonight. Alessandro's eyes narrowed slightly. I did? Yes, she whispered. You promised no decisions for me. Alessandro nodded. I'm keeping it. Grace inhaled slowly, then said, Then I'm deciding something. He waited. I'm staying here tomorrow morning, she said. Not because I need hiding, because I want clarity, and because I want to see if you can actually do this the way you say. Alessandro's mouth curved faintly. Testing me. Grace's smile flickered. Yes, I deserve that, he said simply. Grace's expression softened. Maybe. Then quietly she added, But I also want you. Alessandro's breath shifted. His eyes held hers, dark and attentive. Grace continued, voice low but steady. Not as a distraction. Not because I'm scared. Because when you kissed me tonight, it felt like coming home. Alessandro's face changed, control loosening, emotion showing in the smallest ways. He reached up and brushed his thumb gently along her cheekbone. You make it hard to be disciplined, he murmured. Grace's lips curved. I don't want disciplined. He leaned in and kissed her slowly, like he had all the time in the world. Grace met him halfway, her hand sliding into his hair. The kiss wasn't frantic, it was certain. Warm. Intimate in a way that had nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with trust. When they broke apart, Grace rested her forehead against his. Are you still going to stay awake? She asked softly. Alessandro exhaled against her lips, almost smiling. I might compromise. Grace smiled. Good. He pulled her closer under the sheets again, and for a while the world narrowed to small things. Breathing, warmth, the quiet sounds of the city far below. Grace finally let her eyelids close, her body easing, the tension draining from her muscles. Alessandro stayed still, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing as it deepened. When he was certain she'd drifted, he slipped out of bed carefully, moving like a shadow without drama. He pulled on sweatpants and a dark t-shirt and walked barefoot to the living area. The penthouse was silent except for the faint hum of the HVAC. He poured a glass of water instead of whiskey this time and stared at the city. He wasn't alone, even when she slept. That was the problem. That was also the only thing that mattered. His phone buzzed again. Alessandro glanced down. Another message from the same contact. He's not just watching, he's calling in favors. He wants her scared enough to make a mistake. Alessandro's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. He opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he hadn't used in months. Evelyn Price. Grace's old friend, technically. A high-level attorney with a reputation for clean work and ruthless competence. Evelyn had once looked Alessandro straight in the eye at a charity dinner and said, "You're not the scary part, Mr. DeLuca. The scary part is how quiet you are." He called. It rang once, twice. A voice answered, crisp and irritated. "If this is a sales call, I'm going to be unkind." "Evelyn," Alessandro said calmly. "It's Alessandro DeLuca." There was a pause, long enough to register surprise. Then, "It's 2 in the morning." "I know. Someone is dead," she said flatly. "No," he replied. "No one is dead." Another pause. "Then someone is going to be." Alessandro's mouth tightened. "Also no." Evelyn exhaled like she was trying not to laugh. "That's a new one for you. I need counsel at 9 a.m. for Grace Miller." Silence again. Different this time. More focused. "She's in trouble," Evelyn said, tone sharpening. "Yes. And you're calling me because I want this handled legally and cleanly," he said. "And because you won't be intimidated." Evelyn let out a soft hum. "Flattery at 2 a.m. Bold." "It's accurate," Alessandro said. Evelyn sighed. "Where is she?" Alessandro glanced toward the bedroom hallway, his voice lowering. "She's safe." Evelyn's pause was short. "At your place." Alessandro didn't confirm or deny. Evelyn made a sound like she had just won an argument in her head. "Okay, 9 a.m., my office. Bring her. Bring every detail." "And Alessandro?" "Yes." "If you try to assist in any way that makes a judge raise an eyebrow, I will personally drag you into court by your collar." Alessandro's mouth curved faintly. "Understood." "And tell Grace," Evelyn added, "that if she's been brave alone, she doesn't have to be brave alone anymore." Alessandro's voice softened. "I will." He ended the call and set the phone down, the water untouched. He stood at the window, watching the city like it was a map, like he could see every threat moving across it. Then he heard soft footsteps behind him. Grace. She appeared at the edge of the living room, hair loose, his sheets still warm against her skin. She wore his shirt now, oversized on her, and the sight of it made Alessandro's control slip in a way that wasn't convenient. "You weren't in bed," she said quietly. Alessandro turned toward her, keeping his expression gentle. "I didn't want to wake you." Grace walked closer, stopping a few feet away. "You called someone." It wasn't a question. Alessandro nodded. "Evelyn Price, 9 a.m. Grace's face softened. "You did that for me." "I did that with you," he corrected. "You asked for clean." "I'm giving you clean." Grace's eyes glistened slightly, but she blinked it away quickly like she refused to cry from gratitude. "I'm not used to you doing things without trying to control the outcome," she said. Alessandro stepped closer, slow, giving her room to back away if she wanted. She didn't. "I'm not used to losing you," he replied. Grace's breath caught. He lifted his hand and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch light. "Come back to bed," he murmured. "You need sleep." Grace's lips curved faintly. "You're still trying to decide for me." Alessandro exhaled, amused. "I'm making a suggestion." Grace leaned in, her voice low, then suggested again. Alessandro kissed her, gentle, warm, unhurried. Grace melted into him, hands sliding around his waist, her body fitting against his like it remembered. They walked back to the bedroom together, not rushing, not pretending this was anything other than what it was. Two people who had loved each other badly once, trying to love each other well now. Grace curled against him again under the sheets, her head on his chest. "Alessandro," she whispered, her voice sleepy. "Yes?" "If Wesley Hart is involved, and he's tied to your world, why didn't he use you directly?" Alessandro's eyes opened slowly. He stared into the dark. That, he said quietly, is the right question. Grace shifted, looking up at him. So what's the answer? Alessandro hesitated, then spoke carefully. Because he doesn't want me angry. He wants me unsure. He wants me divided. Grace's brows knit. Divided how? Alessandro's hand tightened slightly around her shoulder. Between protecting you and protecting something else. Grace went still. What else? Alessandro's throat tightened with a different kind of tension now. One that wasn't about danger outside, but about what lived inside the truth. He didn't want to say it. He also knew he couldn't avoid it forever. He exhaled slowly. There's one way someone like Wesley Hart gets bold enough to use you. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. Tell me. Alessandro looked down at her, eyes steady but serious. Because he believes, Alessandro said, that you have something I can't afford to lose. Grace's stomach tightened. I'm not a thing. I know, he said immediately. But he thinks in leverage. Grace swallowed. And what does he think I have? Alessandro's voice dropped, controlled and careful. A key, he said, to something I kept from you. Grace froze, her eyes wide in the dim light. What did you keep from me? She whispered. Alessandro didn't answer. He held her close, his silence loud in the dark, and Grace realized the next morning wasn't just about a drive in a storage locker. It was about what Alessandro had hidden during their marriage, and why Wesley Hart believed she could unlock it. Grace didn't sleep after that. She lay against Alessandro's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, her mind circling the same words over and over. A key to something I kept from you. The phrase sat between them like a third presence in the bed, heavy, unanswered. When morning light began to creep through the curtains, pale and quiet, Grace finally shifted, not abruptly, carefully, like she didn't want to wake more than his body. She didn't want to wake whatever was buried under his calm. Alessandro's eyes opened anyway. He was already awake. You didn't answer me, Grace said softly. His arm tightened slightly around her. I know. She tilted her head back to look at him. I need you to. Alessandro stared at the ceiling for a moment, jaw set, as if the words were lined up somewhere, and he just needed the courage to let them out. Not here, he said finally. Not like this. Grace's chest tightened. You said no more decisions for me. He met her gaze immediately. And I'm not deciding. I'm asking. Asking what? Give me the morning, he said. Give me a chance to explain everything in the open, with no interruptions, no half-truths. Grace studied his face. He wasn't deflecting. He wasn't shutting her out. He was bracing himself. Okay, she said after a beat, but you don't get to soften it. I won't, he promised. They got dressed in silence, but it wasn't cold. It was focused. Grace wore one of his sweaters and her own jeans. Alessandro wore a suit without a tie, formal but not armored. At 9 sharp, they walked into Evelyn Price's office. Evelyn didn't waste time on greetings. She took one look at Grace's posture, Alessandro's expression, and motioned them into a conference room. Sit, she said. Both of you. Grace sat. Alessandro stayed standing for a second, then followed. Evelyn folded her arms. Start talking. Grace first. Grace told everything. The shelter, the email, the donor, the file, the planted watch. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't minimize it either. She spoke clearly, steadily, like someone who had decided not to be afraid of her own voice anymore. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When Grace finished, Evelyn turned to Alessandro. Now you. Alessandro inhaled slowly. Wesley Hart is a parasite, he said. He doesn't build, he attaches. He looks for systems that already exist and exploits the parts people don't want to see. Evelyn nodded. I know the type. He believed Grace was leverage. Alessandro continued. Not because she's weak, because she's moral. Grace looked at him sharply. Alessandro met her eyes. You don't bend. People like him don't understand that. They think everyone has a price. Evelyn interjected. And the key you mentioned? Alessandro's jaw tightened. That's where this gets complicated. Grace's heart started to race. Alessandro continued, voice steady but stripped of ornament. 3 years ago, before the shelter, before the divorce, I inherited something. Grace frowned. Inherited what? A controlling interest in a holding company, he said, one that operates legally, on paper. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. On paper. Yes, Alessandro said. In reality, it sits on top of old money, old roots, and old agreements that were never fully dismantled. Grace leaned forward. Why didn't you tell me? Alessandro didn't look away. Because it wasn't active, and because I was trying to end that side of things quietly. Grace's chest tightened. Quietly for who? For you, he said, so you wouldn't have to carry it. Evelyn raised a finger. Pause. That instinct? That's where you went wrong. Alessandro nodded once. I know that now. Grace's voice trembled, just slightly. And me? Where do I fit into that? Alessandro swallowed. The holding company was registered under a family trust. One of the co-signatures was tied to my spouse at the time. Grace froze. Me. Yes, he said. Only as a legal safeguard. A way to prevent hostile takeover if something happened to me. Grace stared at him, stunned. You made me a safeguard, without telling me. Alessandro's voice was low. I never activated it. I never intended for you to be exposed. Evelyn leaned back. But Wesley Hart knows the trust exists. Yes, Alessandro said, and he believes Grace holds a legal access point. Grace's stomach dropped. So that's why he targeted me. Alessandro nodded. He thought pressure would make you open something you didn't even know you had. Grace stood abruptly, pacing the room. You didn't trust me enough to tell me, but you trusted me enough to make me a shield. Alessandro stood too, immediately. I trusted you more than anyone. That was the problem. Grace turned on him. That's not trust. That's protection without consent. Silence slammed into the room. Evelyn didn't interrupt. Alessandro's voice dropped. I know. And that's why I lost you. Grace stopped pacing. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Wesley Hart thought he could scare me, she said slowly. He thought I'd fold. Alessandro nodded. He underestimated you. Grace turned back to him. And you underestimated me too. He didn't argue. Yes. Evelyn cleared her throat. Here's the good news. If the drive proves financial laundering through the shelter, and if Wesley Hart attempted coercion through false arrest, we have leverage, legal leverage. Grace looked at her. What happens to me? Evelyn's answer was immediate. You walk free, clean, possibly as a witness. Grace exhaled shakily. And him? Grace asked, nodding toward Alessandro. Evelyn smiled thinly. He stays out of my way and listens. Alessandro nodded once. Agreed. By noon, they were at the storage facility. Daylight changed everything. The place looked ordinary, boring, safe. Grace retrieved the envelope with steady hands. Alessandro didn't touch it. Evelyn photographed it, sealed it, documented the transfer. No shadows, no shortcuts. As they walked back to the car, Grace finally let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for months. It's over, she said quietly. Alessandro didn't say yes. Grace noticed. What? It's ending, he said carefully. Not over. Grace's shoulders tensed. Meaning? Wesley Hart won't like losing control, Alessandro said. But he won't come at you again. Not after today. Grace stopped walking. Why? Alessandro turned to her fully. Because I removed the leverage. Grace's brows knit. How? Alessandro's voice was calm. I dissolved the trust this morning. Grace stared at him. You did what? I removed your name. Permanently. Grace's chest tightened. Without telling me? Yes, he said honestly. Because this time, I wasn't protecting. I was releasing. Grace searched his face. And what if I wanted to stay? Alessandro's voice softened. Then it would be your choice. They stood there, the city moving around them. Normal life continuing like nothing monumental had just happened. Grace's voice dropped. You're learning. Alessandro nodded. Slowly. They drove back in silence, but it wasn't heavy now. It was thoughtful. Back at his place, Grace set her bag down and turned to him. You didn't have to remove me, she said. I know, he replied. Part of me wanted to be trusted with it, she admitted. Alessandro's eyes held hers. Then let me say this clearly. Not as a boss, not as someone protecting anything. Grace waited. I trust you, he said. With truth, with choice, with me. Her throat tightened. She stepped closer. Then hear this. He leaned in slightly. I don't want to be your shield, Grace said. I want to be your partner. Alessandro's breath caught. That's a dangerous request. Grace smiled softly. I'm not fragile. I know, he said, smiling back. She reached up, cupping his face. And I don't want the man who hides things from me. You won't get him, Alessandro said. Not again. Grace kissed him then, not desperate, not afraid, certain. Later, as the sun dipped and the city softened, Grace rested against him on the couch. One more question, she said. Yes? If Wesley Hart believed I was a key, what was the lock? Alessandro exhaled slowly, eyes distant. My exit, he said. From everything. Grace went still. You were trying to leave? She whispered. Yes, he said. For you. Grace closed her eyes, emotion washing over her. And now? She asked. Alessandro looked at her, honest and unguarded. Now, he said, I want to build something new, with you, if you'll choose it. Grace opened her eyes and met his gaze. Her answer didn't come immediately, and the way she smiled told him the final chapter wasn't about danger anymore. It was about what they would choose to become together. Grace didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't know what she felt. She did. It was clear in her chest, clear in the way her body leaned toward him without thinking. But she'd spent too long being the woman who adapted, the woman who waited, the woman who tried to be easy, so love would stay. She wasn't doing that again. Alessandro sat with her on the couch, one arm along the backrest behind her, close enough to be there, far enough to prove he meant it when he said she would choose. Outside, the city moved on like nothing had happened. Cars, people, distant music drifting up from a street below. Inside, it felt like time had narrowed down to one question. Grace turned her head and looked at him fully. If I choose you, she said quietly, I'm not choosing the version of you that thinks love is a cage with velvet lining. Alessandro's mouth twitched like he wanted to smile but knew this wasn't the moment to soften it. You won't get that version. You said that before, she replied. He nodded once. And I failed. The honesty disarmed her. It always did. Not the power, not the calm, just the plain truth, spoken without armor. Grace exhaled. So why should I believe you now? Alessandro leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, gaze steady. Because I'm not asking you to trust my intentions. I'm asking you to watch my actions. Grace stared at him. What actions? He reached for his phone on the coffee table and unlocked it, turning the screen toward her without hesitation. Evelyn has everything. The report, the photos, the chain of custody. The envelope is already logged. Grace's heartbeat slowed, just a little. Okay? Alessandro continued, voice calm. Tomorrow morning, she files a request to dismiss the charges. She also files a complaint for false evidence and unlawful coercion. The shelter's board will be notified. The Financial Crimes Unit will see the transfer pattern. Grace blinked. You already set that in motion? Yes. And you didn't tell me, she said, watching him closely. Alessandro's jaw tightened. I didn't want you to think I did it to win you back. Grace tilted her head. And did you? He didn't dodge. I did it because you were right. Clean. Daylight. No pressure. Grace's eyes softened. You're learning. He nodded. I am. A small silence settled, softer than the ones before. Then Grace asked the question that had been living under everything else. Why didn't you tell me about the trust? Alessandro's expression tightened with something like regret. Because I thought telling you would make you carry it. Grace's voice stayed gentle, but firm. You don't get to decide what I can carry. He looked at her, eyes steady. I know. Grace studied him for a long moment, then shifted closer, resting her hand on his knee. The touch was simple. It felt like an agreement. Here's what I want, she said. Alessandro's gaze dropped to her hand, then back to her face. Tell me. I want honesty that doesn't come late, Grace said. I want you to stop thinking love means managing the risk by controlling the person you love. Alessandro inhaled slowly. Okay. Grace's brow lifted. That was too easy. A faint smile touched his mouth. It's not easy. It's just clear. Grace's lips curved. And I want us to be normal sometimes. He glanced around his penthouse, deadpan. Define normal. Grace let out a quiet laugh. Like, we go to a diner, and you don't look like you're planning a rescue mission. Alessandro nodded solemnly. Impossible. Grace bumped his shoulder lightly. Try. He caught her hand gently. I will. Grace's smile faded into something more serious. And I want romance, Alessandro. Not grand gestures that fix problems. Real romance, presence, attention. The little things you used to forget when work swallowed you. His gaze softened. Tell me what the little things are. Grace blinked, surprised by the question. You don't know? I know some, he said, but I want to learn the ones I missed. Grace's throat tightened. She looked away for a second, gathering herself. Okay, then start with this. She turned back to him. When I talk, don't plan your answer while I'm still speaking. Alessandro's lips parted, then closed again. He nodded. Okay, Grace watched him. And when I'm upset, don't try to solve it in 10 minutes. He exhaled like that one hurt. That will be harder. Grace smiled, soft and real. Good. Try anyway. Alessandro took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles. Slow, deliberate. Grace felt it everywhere. Warmth, memory, longing. But this time, it didn't feel like being pulled into the past. It felt like being invited into the future. He lowered her hand gently. Now tell me, he said quietly, what you want to choose. Grace held his gaze, heart steadying. I want to choose you. Alessandro didn't move for a beat, like he didn't trust the world not to take it away the moment he reacted. Then his expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. Relief first, then something deeper, something that looked like a man finally letting himself believe he could be loved without earning it through sacrifice. Grace's voice softened. But I'm not moving back in tonight. Alessandro blinked. You're not? Grace's mouth curved. No. His eyebrows lifted. That's unexpected. Grace smiled. See? Normal. Alessandro exhaled a laugh, quiet and helpless. Where are you going? Grace slid off the couch, still holding his hand. I'm going to my sister's. I'm going to sleep in my own bed. I'm going to wake up and choose you again in the morning. Alessandro's gaze followed her like he was trying not to beg. And if something happens? Grace stepped closer, rising onto her toes to kiss him softly. Then you'll hear from me, not from a police officer. He closed his eyes briefly, as if that healed something in him. Grace pulled back. Also, you're going to stop paying people to keep an eye on me, if you ever did. Alessandro's face remained calm, but his eyes gave him away. Grace narrowed hers. You did. He exhaled. Once. Grace stared. Alessandro. It was after the divorce, he said quickly. And it wasn't to control you. It was to make sure you were safe. Grace folded her arms. That's still control adjacent. Alessandro's mouth twitched. Control adjacent. Grace pointed at him. You're going to tell them to stop. He nodded. Tonight. Grace's expression softened again. Thank you. Alessandro stood and walked her to the door. He didn't try to block her. He didn't try to convince her. He simply stayed close, like he was learning the difference between protection and possession. At the threshold, Grace paused. One more thing. Yes? Grace glanced at his bare feet, then up at his face. You're going to eat, and you're going to sleep. Alessandro looked offended. I'm being ordered. Grace smiled. Suggested. He huffed a quiet laugh. Fine. Grace leaned in and kissed him again, slow and warm. Then she stepped back. Tomorrow, she said. Alessandro's gaze held hers. Tomorrow. Grace left. The door clicked shut. Alessandro stood still for a moment in the quiet apartment, the place feeling different without her breath in it, like it remembered her and waited. He turned, walked to the window and looked out over the city. His phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn. FYI, Wesley Hart's attorney called mine. They're asking for a private resolution. Translation, they're nervous. Alessandro stared at the screen. Private resolution meant money. It meant silence. It meant they were used to buying their way out of consequences. Not this time. His phone buzzed again. Another message, from the same encrypted contact. He wants to meet. He says he can make it all disappear. Alessandro's jaw tightened. A year ago, he would have gone alone, handled it quietly, and told Grace nothing so she could sleep. Tonight, he did something else. He called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you're not meeting him. I'm not, Alessandro said. But I want you to know he reached out. Evelyn exhaled, satisfied. Good. Send me the number. Alessandro forwarded it. Evelyn's tone turned clinical. He's fishing. If you bite, he'll claim you threatened him, or he'll try to pull you into a side deal that looks terrible in court. I know, Alessandro said. And, Evelyn added, Grace is not to hear about this from anyone except you. Alessandro's voice softened. She won't. Evelyn paused. You sound like a man who's trying to be decent. I am, Alessandro said. For her. Evelyn sighed. Then keep doing it. I'll handle the legal side. You handle the emotional side. And Alessandro? Yes. Don't propose in a courtroom. I'm begging you. Alessandro blinked. That wasn't my plan. Evelyn scoffed. Men like you always have a plan. Good night. Alessandro ended the call, staring at the city again. He wasn't going to meet Wesley Hart. He wasn't going to play shadow games. And tomorrow, Grace would choose him again. Or she wouldn't. The thought should have terrified him. It did. But it also felt clean. He finally understood. Love wasn't secure because you controlled the perimeter. Love was secure because the person stayed. Freely. Alessandro turned away from the window and walked to the kitchen. He opened the fridge. He stared at it like it might attack him. Then he pulled out a container labeled in neat handwriting. Grace. Sunday sauce. Do not touch. He froze. A slow smile spread across his face, genuine and stunned. She must have left it there months ago. Or maybe she'd brought it today and told the staff to put it inside. Either way, it felt like a message. Not dramatic, not a grand gesture, just a quiet reminder of home. Alessandro exhaled a laugh and shook his head. Unbelievable. He warmed it up anyway. And for the first time in 3 months, he ate something that tasted like being forgiven. But as he stood there with a bowl in his hands, the question he couldn't ignore pressed against his ribs. Tomorrow morning. When Grace looked at him in daylight, with everything on the table, would she still want him? Grace woke up in her sister's guest room to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Her sister, Natalie, stood in the doorway with a mug and a look that said she knew everything without being told. Grace groaned. Don't. Natalie handed her the coffee. I wasn't going to say anything. Grace narrowed her eyes. That's a lie. Natalie smiled sweetly. Okay, fine. I was going to say, you look like you slept, which means you were somewhere you felt safe. Grace took a sip, eyes down. I did. Natalie leaned against the door frame. Was it him? Grace didn't answer immediately. Natalie softened. Grace, if you're going back, go back because you want love, not because you want relief. Grace nodded, the words landing exactly where they needed to. That's what I'm doing. Natalie studied her face. Then go. An hour later, Grace walked into Evelyn Price's office again, this time alone. Evelyn looked up from her desk. You look calmer. Grace sat. I am. Evelyn slid a document across to her. Charges are being dismissed. The evidence is compromised. The facility's board is cooperating. Wesley Hart's side is suddenly very interested in staying quiet. Grace stared at the paper, relief washing through her so strongly she almost laughed. It's done, she whispered. It's clean, Evelyn corrected, and there's more. Wesley's counsel requested a settlement and offered to sign a restraining agreement that keeps him away from you, the shelter, and anything connected. He wants this to disappear. Grace nodded slowly. Good. Evelyn watched her. Now, the personal part. Grace's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. Yes. Evelyn's tone softened, just enough to be human. Alessandro called me last night instead of meeting Wesley. He disclosed the outreach. He chose daylight. Grace's chest warmed, emotion rising fast. Evelyn leaned forward. If you decide to be with him, don't do it because he's powerful. Do it because he's willing. Grace nodded, eyes shining. That's why. Grace left the office and drove straight to Alessandro's building. This time, she didn't hesitate at the lobby. She didn't scan corners. She didn't brace. She went up. Alessandro opened the door before she knocked, like he had been waiting right behind it. He looked different in daylight, still composed, still controlled, but softer around the eyes. He hadn't shaved. He looked like a man who slept poorly and hoped anyway. Grace stepped inside. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. Then Grace said quietly, Charges are dismissed. Alessandro's shoulders eased, a breath leaving him like he had been holding it all night. Good. Grace looked up at him. Evelyn told me you didn't meet him. Alessandro didn't pretend. I didn't. Grace nodded. Thank you. He swallowed. I did it for you. Grace stepped closer. No, you did it with me. Alessandro's eyes glistened for a second before he looked away, as if emotion was still unfamiliar territory. Grace reached up and guided his face back to hers. Look at me. He did. Grace's voice was steady. I choose you. In daylight. On purpose. Alessandro's breath hitched. Grace continued, softer now. But I'm choosing the man who tells me the truth, even when he's afraid. The man who doesn't confuse love with control. Alessandro nodded, voice low. You'll have him. Grace smiled. Good. Alessandro's hand slid gently to her waist, pulling her close. No force, no urgency, only warmth. Then I want to ask you something. Grace's heart fluttered. Okay. He stepped back just enough to reach into his pocket. Grace's eyes widened as he pulled out a small velvet box. Grace froze. Alessandro. He looked almost nervous, which was ridiculous and perfect all at once. Evelyn told me not to do this in a courtroom. Grace laughed, a bright sound that made his shoulders loosen. He opened the box. The ring was elegant, beautiful but not loud, like a promise meant to be lived with, not displayed. Alessandro's voice softened. I don't want to marry you because I'm scared to lose you. I want to marry you because I finally know how to keep you by letting you be free. Grace's eyes filled. You're going to make me cry. Alessandro's mouth curved. I'm willing to take that risk. Grace's laugh broke into a soft sob. She wiped her cheek and shook her head, smiling through it. Yes, she whispered. Alessandro's breath left him like a miracle. He slid the ring onto her finger slowly, reverently, then kissed her hand. Grace pulled him up and kissed him, warm, sure, laughing against his mouth like she couldn't believe this was real and didn't want to waste a second doubting it. Weeks later, they stood in the same diner where everything had started to feel normal again. The waitress, now apparently their self-appointed life coach, looked at Grace's ring and nodded, About time. Grace laughed. Alessandro tried to look offended, failed, and ordered pie without pretending he didn't want it. And when Grace reached across the table and laced her fingers with his, Alessandro held on like he'd finally learned the simplest truth of all. Love wasn't something you won. Love was something you chose, every day.